Friends, welcome to the YouTube channel Ukraine Today. This is the topic of the day. Don't forget to like this episode and subscribe to our channel. We are already talking about 31 victims of the Russian missile strike in Kyiv. Ukraine has initiated an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council due to yet another barbaric shelling, and Zelensky has called on the West to push for regime change in Russia. Meanwhile, Trump is planning to pressure Putin into agreeing to a ceasefire. He called Russia's actions disgusting and stated that sanctions against the Russian Federation are inevitable in the near future. Special envoy Witkoff is heading to Russia again. It will be interesting to see what kind of conversation takes place in the Kremlin this time. But Putin himself didn't wait for Witkoff. After praying together with Lukashenko on Valam, he finally voiced his response to Trump's ultimatum. We'll tell you what his response was in our report. Spoiler, he didn't surprise anyone.
Now that's news. Putin is ready to end the war. But, as always, only on his own terms. All Ukraine needs to do is withdraw its troops from the Zaporizhzhia and Kherson regions, as well as from the so-called DPR and LPR.
As soon as Kiev announces that it is ready for such a solution and begins the actual withdrawal of troops from these regions, as well as officially notifies us of its refusal to pursue NATO membership on our part, an order to cease fire and begin negotiations will follow immediately, literally at that very moment.
Zelensky is calling on the international community to bring about regime change in Russia. Otherwise, Putin will continue to destabilize the situation in neighboring countries even after the war in Ukraine is over.
Zelensky is absolutely right, because Putin has unhealthy imperial ambitions that run counter to the idea of peaceful coexistence of states on the European continent. And even after the end of the war in Ukraine, it's clear that he will be planning new acts of aggression. These could be either the Baltic countries or the Scandinavian ones, possibly Poland. But it's clear that Putin has an irrepressible desire to carry out a kind of revision in geopolitics and to restore Russia's lost influence.
Meanwhile, the Ukrainian authorities have initiated an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council after the massive shelling of Kyiv.
The emergency meeting of the UN Security Council on the agenda item Maintaining Peace and Security in Ukraine will take place tomorrow, August 1st. Putin rejects efforts for peace and seeks to prolong his war. But the world has enough strength to stop him through unified pressure and a principled stance in favor of a complete, immediate, and unconditional ceasefire.
But it seems that the Russian dictator himself is losing ground. Peskov stated that on July 31st, Putin would deliver a key message directed at Trump. But for some reason, that didn't happen.
It's clear that as of today, Russia is not confident in its position. They lack, and Putin in particular lacks, the courage to speak out publicly against the American president. Yes, he tries to fool him, he throws up a lot of smoke and mirrors for Trump, but at the same time, to come out like a man and openly say that these threats don't scare me, that I'm ready to counter them, he can't do that. As of now, Putin is not ready for that.
Nevertheless, it seems Trump is taking things seriously and even responded to the recent shelling of Kyiv.
I think what they're doing is disgusting. I think it's disgusting. This is Biden's war, not my war. But I think what Russia is doing is very sad.
The US president also announced his intention to impose sanctions against Russia after a 10-day period.
Yes, we are going to impose sanctions. I don't know if the sanctions bother him. They already know everything about them anyway. I know more about sanctions, tariffs, and all that than anyone else. I'm not sure it has any effect at all, but we're going to do it.
Next, Trump announced yet another visit by Witkoff.
Yes, he's going to Israel, and then he's going to Russia, believe it or not.
Witkoff often visits Putin like that. But what is the purpose of his visit this time?
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Could it really be that he wants to persuade him to accept Trump's ultimatum?
The story with Witkoff's trip, it honestly looks like a complete waste of time on the part of the American administration. And it's obvious that if Trump wants to achieve any progress regarding a ceasefire, or even more so in terms of a peace process, he needs to impose the sanctions with which he's been threatening Russia. And clearly it's necessary to increase arms supplies to Ukraine.
US Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated that Trump has plenty of options for influencing Russia, but the US would really prefer not to use them. As for Medvedev and his recent nuclear threats toward the US, no one really took him seriously.
Essentially, he is not a relevant player in Russian politics. He doesn't make decisions. He hasn't been present at any of the meetings or conversations we've ever had. His words will have an impact in terms of provocation and other things of that nature. I'm not sure he's speaking on behalf of the official Russian position, but he is certainly someone in an official position in Russia who says things that are provocative.
And as it turns out, Putin's desires were already known back in as early as 1994. Germany's foreign ministry found archival documents in which Putin firmly stated that Crimea, eastern Ukraine, and even northern Kazakhstan had never been foreign to Russia, but had always been part of Russian territory.
Next, we speak with Oleg Pastanak, a political strategist and head of the Center for Political Intelligence. Oleg, hello. Very glad to have you with us.
Hello to everyone listening.
For a long time, weeks, painfully long, Putin remained silent, afraid to respond to Trump's ultimatums, responding only through actions, yes, by intensifying shelling across all of Ukraine, and in particular, the latest was a missile and drone attack on the capital, Kyiv. But today, for some reason, he decided to speak out. Why? First question, and what did you hear as a political strategist? What was he trying to convey between the lines, and to whom? Did he reject all of Trump's claims, or is this just another trick? He's buying time and trying to appease the American president.
Well, with one key difference, unlike his previous communication tricks, where Putin tried to frame his supposed willingness for peace, this time he laid out clear, tough, key conditions, repeating them as if they were the June terms, and at the same time demonstrated his fanatical stubbornness, making it clear to Trump that he will not back down from his exaggerated maximalist demands. That is, well, politics happens on two main levels. There is the politics of action and the politics of statements, of words. In principle, as you correctly noted, Putin's politics of action are obvious. These are missile and drone attacks, intensified assaults, and the difficult situation near Pokrovsk. There is also the attempt to conduct military operations in the Sumy region, creating enclaves of territory under their control and occupation. The politics of statements is Russia has long played the role of peacemaker, acting as a compliant party open to potential peaceful dialogue, a compliant side meant to show the whole world, especially the countries of the global south, its supposed capacity for humanitarian behavior in the context of a bloody war and so on. But now the masks are completely off, which in fact was probably obvious to all those people, experts, analysts, journalists who had previously assumed that Putin would behave this way. Nothing new. Absolutely everything is in the old style.
Is Putin confused or confident? What did you see?
Well, if we take his meeting with Lukashenko today...
Because honestly, those two old men on the bench looked quite pathetic, didn't they?
No. You hit the nail right on the head. Well, we are certainly used to it. I mean, those of us who diligently observe Putin, particularly expert political analysts, we are accustomed to consistently seeing Putin always on top, always presenting himself as this dominant alpha male, a truly formidable man who, even at his advanced age, is remarkably physically healthy, possesses truly tremendous and persuasive communication skills, and actively engages in various sports activities. But now, compared to Lukashenko, he looks extremely pitiful. That's true. Although both of them are already of a certain age, nevertheless, Lukashenko actually looks physically more capable. Putin, on the other hand, looks completely decrepit, bewildered, sullenly absorbed in some emotions and thoughts, not at all like the leader of a supposedly great state, but rather like an old man sitting on a bench, cracking sunflower seeds, with the sense that maybe the universe will take pity on him and some miracle will happen that will allow Putin to realize his fantastical dream of destroying the Ukrainian state and Ukrainian identity. Well, in this particular case, a sense of fatalism is probably not the most effective tool that the Russian Federation can strategically utilize when it comes to its ambitious so-called grand plans and geopolitical objectives.
Overall, after his statement today, and recalling the recent statement by the head of Austria, if I'm not mistaken, about how Trump was ready to give Putin 4 Ukrainian regions in exchange for a ceasefire, for a quick settlement. That's how Trump saw it 6 months ago or 3 months ago. At that time, Putin refused and dismissed Trump's offer. Now it seems that Putin is trying to backtrack and signal to Trump. Well, he's saying that he's ready to end the war on the terms of 2024, which specifically means the withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from 4 Ukrainian regions, right? But do you think Trump would agree to that today? After all, he will hear this message.
The crucial thing is, at this very point regarding Putin's fervent wish and his explicit demand, there is essentially a significant landmine deeply buried here. A concealed and dangerous landmine is indeed hidden. If Trump even feels a certain emotional temptation to try to pressure Kyiv into conceding to Putin on the 4 territories, and then Putin wants recognition of these territories as part of Russia, which in fact Nicaragua has already seemingly tried to implement, clearly having long played the role of a proxy, serving Russia's interests at the Kremlin's request. And this temptation is extremely strong for a politician like Trump, so that's why your question here is probably absolutely reasonable. Although there is an opinion that in recent months, Trump has become more rational in foreign policy matters and has started listening more to various groups of lower-level officials, managers, and advisors. As for how systematic this is, I wouldn't say it gives Ukraine a 100% guarantee or confidence that Trump won't start a new shift toward Russia. But what's extremely telling in this regard is the visit announced so far only by American media. Witkoff's visit, first to Israel regarding the Middle East issue between Hamas and Israel, and then to Russia. It seems to me that this visit by Witkoff is actually the prelude to the finalization of Trump's efforts. In other words, Witkoff's task is to come and ask, is this your final word, Mr. Putin, or do you have...
The final test of adequacy, you mean, right? The final test of negotiability and adequacy. Or maybe he's bringing Putin a black mark.
Maybe, because it's clear that, in my opinion, the toolkit announced by the White House is much broader than, besides the embargo, or rather some customs duties, besides increasing military aid to Ukraine, besides secondary sanctions, both banking and energy related against Russia, the US administration may have several tools that are much more problematic for Putin to deal with than the Russian Kremlin leadership comments on the topic of sanctions with such self-confidence. They say they've already gotten used to sanctions and have learned to survive under import substitution, although that's actually not the case. But for Russia, it's already like an immunity, at least an informational immunity to sanctions. For the Kremlin and for the average Russian citizen, it's unlikely that Trump announcing another round of sanctions, even if they're more painful for the economy, will create or generate any psychological effect in Russia. Even if, I repeat once again, they really do bring the Russian economy closer to a serious recession. And it's very obvious, yes, that this is the case. Nevertheless, they are not able to create a psychological effect after 3.5 years of war. But what is much more uncomfortable and dangerous for Russia are the other tools that the US has. I have already said this several times, at least there are definitely 2 tools. One is putting pressure on Russia through China by Washington, moving towards a new format of more stable relations with Beijing, formalized as the achievement of a beneficial trade deal, and then accordingly implying political agreements as well. In other words, putting pressure on Moscow through China in the name of stabilizing international relations. And the second tool, believe me, American and European intelligence agencies have the means to instigate certain domestic political crises in Russia that would force Putin to significantly divert his attention from his foreign policy obsession with Ukraine. In your segment right at the very beginning, my esteemed colleagues, you explicitly mentioned that, yes, undoubtedly such significant things can indeed genuinely take place. Let me repeat once more. Western intelligence agencies do have tools of influence. At one particular point in time, some of these initiatives were temporarily put on a significant pause. There were also some subtle hints and indications that emerged during that period. For example, we all remember the Kokos incident and the terrorist attack by the Islamic State against Russia. So there can be a wide variety of such situations. And Putin is stepping onto a path where he's playing with even more serious fire. And for him, his current regime is not, a truly cast iron totalitarian regime like, say, the oppressive Stalinism squared. It is a system that, while authoritarian, lacks the absolute unyielding control seen in such extreme historical examples. Absolutely not. Putin was unable to replicate the experience of Kim Jong-il or Stalin, or even, the most terrifying totalitarian regimes of Cambodia. On the contrary, he has and continues to have many domestic vulnerabilities, ranging from issues of national relations to conflicts between the federal government and the regions, as well as between the Russian economic elite and the Chekist GRU group, which currently has a decisive influence on Putin.
Oleg, to sum up our extensive conversation, can we now, with a moderate and cautious degree of optimism, truly say that the pressure spring is really tightening for Vladimir Putin this time, perhaps more significantly than ever before? And in light of Trump's statements about August 8th, in light of Tusk's remarks that everything could end soon, do you see any signs that, this prediction, say about August 8th, even if there are some inaccuracies, that something is indeed happening right now? I'm asking what people are asking each other in their kitchens right now.
Yes, you're right. This question is really triggering and hanging in the air right now. In part, it's a bit conspiratorial because it's not based on real facts. And the real facts are Putin's obsession, his desire to fight to the end, his confidence that he will achieve the results of his war, the strengthening of the repressive police state in Russia, and so on. In other words, this is the reality. It shows that he has no intention of stopping, and his communication basically matches his real desires and real interests. This is one of those cases where he is definitely not bluffing when it comes to his intentions. As for the means, it's clear that even now, with Ukraine exhausted by war, he still can't achieve what he really wanted to do back in 2022, much as he wants to. And so he transfers this into the virtual informational world. His stubbornness regarding maximalism, denazification, demilitarization, and Ukraine's non-nuclear neutral status, he repeats these like a mantra and keeps running into the same wall. This artificially creates an expectation and an impression of Putin as someone who, because of his fanaticism, might eventually get his way someday. And naturally, this is broadcast to the global community, but there are no circumstances, no factors indicating that he can actually achieve this. So in this case, it's merely an emotional aspect, an emotional obsession, which is driven more by the inability to achieve his goals than by any real confidence that he will succeed. It's very important for the viewer to understand this right now. Putin is just as much a human being, no matter how he may appear as a political killing machine, a perpetrator of murders. He still remains a typical, ordinary person who is also subject to deviations, altered states of consciousness, intentions, emotions, and so on. And the problem with Russia is that in a single moment, the entire country, its elite and its people, if you can even call them that, became dependent on the emotions, inner preferences, moods, expectations, and deviations of their leader. That is Russia's problem. This problem is not easily solved. Yes, ending the war and getting rid of Putin is the most promising formula in terms of resolving the Russian-Ukrainian war. If there are the strength, the means, the tools, the drive, and the opportunities for this. This is a question for the West, for Ukraine, and for strategic thinking, which sooner or later must finally develop an understanding of who they are dealing with whom they are still trying to think about coexistence. If this coexistence in any system of international relations by itself leads to a third world war while the current state of affairs remains.
Well, let's hope that our partners, first and foremost Donald Trump, yes, already understand that they are dealing with, as you correctly mentioned, with deviations, a person with deviations, and Putin is showing more and more of these deviations. And you know what is making him even more jittery now? This just comes to mind as we wrap up, yes. Putin, as has long been proven, is a man with a mystical way of thinking, all these shamans, fortune tellers, astrologers, and so on. And what about in historical retrospect? We are joining in August. In historical retrospect, this is the most dangerous month for the authorities in the Russian Federation. It is filled with all sorts of coups, poisonings, snuff boxes in the temple, and so on and so forth. So let's also hope for this mystical component of the month. Thank you so much, Oleg, for finding the time and sharing your analysis with us. Let me remind our viewers that today my questions were answered by political strategist and head of the Center for Political Intelligence, Oleg Pastanak. If you enjoyed this conversation, please give it a like. This will help expand our audience. But don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel Ukraine Today. Oleg, thank you so much. See you next time.
All the best.